Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. We're here in Taipei for Computex 2025, and well, we woke up this morning and we saw some pretty disappointing things occurring in the media relating to the GeForce RTX 5060, which, as you all know, is launching in the next couple of days. There's just been some odd preview coverage and that sort of thing, so we wanted to get in front of the camera and just talk about, I guess, Nvidia's manipulation of the media when it comes to previews and review coverage, why you shouldn't be using previews of the RTX 5060 to buy this specific GPU, and why we strongly believe you should still wait for reviews, which is going to be difficult because, you know, we're here in Taipei and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And yeah, just this is a long-running situation that Nvidia has been implementing for a while now. So we're going to give a little bit of a history into it and yeah, just really talk about how it relates to the RTX 5060.
The Hardware Unboxed Computex coverage is brought to you by MSI, Thermal Grizzly, G-Skill and Trix. Check out MSI's range of X870 and B850 motherboards built for the latest AMD Ryzen 9000 series with support for full-speed PCIe 5.0, DDR5 8400+, with aggressive tuning and easy expo profiles. One-click overclocking, extreme power delivery with up to 110 amp power stages, USB 4 as standard on X870 models, along with Wi-Fi 7 and at least 5 gigabit LAN. Learn more about MSI's range of X870 and B850 motherboards via the links in the video description. Also supporting our Computex trip this year is Thermal Grizzly and their Duranaut high-performance thermal paste offering extreme long-term stability combined with outstanding thermal conductivity. It's not electrically conductive and won't harden over time, so for more information please check the links in the video description.
Yeah, so I think we'll go back and talk about some of the examples that have led to where we are right now. Won't dig up a whole, I won't go into every single example because we'd be probably talking for about an hour about all the questionable decisions that have been made over the years. But what stands out to me as sort of a, I don't know if a turning point's the right word, but a point where this started to occur, this manipulation of reviews, most notably would have been probably the RTX 3080 release, which really unnecessary, I thought anyway, because that's a great product, but it was sort of a baby step. And we don't really want to name too many names here. In this example, Digital Foundry were granted early access to look at the RTX 3080 in sort of a preview review style. I think it was a few days before the actual reviews were set to go live, which they did. So in this particular example, it wasn't terribly egregious, but it was still an attempt to manipulate the initial impressions of the product. So in their instance, they were only allowed to benchmark at 4K, comparing the RTX 3080 with the 2080. Now this led to a best case scenario showing typically around an 80% performance uplift. I think they saw about 77% on average, which wasn't that much above what you do see when comparing those two GPUs at 4K. It's around the 70% mark across a wide range of games, so not miles off, but at 1440p, the RTX 3080 wasn't nearly as impressive relative to the 2080 for numerous reasons, and that is still true to this day. You were looking at just shy of a 50% performance uplift on average. So if the initial impression was you're looking at, let's say 48% uplift at 1440p, and that's probably a resolution that most gamers were focused on, it's a lot less exciting than 80%. But again, it's not a horrible example. It wasn't terribly misleading, which is why I think most people were happy with it and it didn't raise too many eyebrows at the time.
It didn't really need to be done, odd choice, and it was very much using the strong reputation that Digital Foundry has built up over the years to basically say exactly what Nvidia has wanted to say through them. So
I wasn't particularly happy with that coverage at the time. Again, don't really want to call Digital Foundry out on that. I think looking back, their content was fine. Definitely showed a best case scenario, but it wasn't miles difference to what reality was. So not a huge problem there. And again, it just didn't need to happen on Nvidia's side. Got even weirder, though probably more well, I don't want to say justified, but it got weirder with the RTX 3090. That's where the whole 8K meme began. And again, they lent on the reputation of multiple well-known, in a lot of instances, trusted media outlets to push the narrative that the RTX 3090 was a product worth buying because it was very future-proof. It was going to support 8K TVs and upcoming gaming monitors and things like that and offer an experience that you just couldn't get on any other GPU. Again, it turned out to be more of the 8K meme. No one really bought that, but they attempted to, again, manipulate the messaging there with sort of early access to this 8K focused content. So we'll sort of fast forward. I think we'll mostly skip the GeForce 40 series and just jump pretty much to the present so we don't drag this out too much. So with the release of the RTX 5070, again, days before those reviews were set to go live, we just out of nowhere saw a series of previews pop up claiming, that it was an amazing gaming experience and it offered huge performance gains, 5070 faster than a 4090 type stuff. It was really parroting those Nvidia marketing talking points. And that, again, was a couple of days before the real independent reviews were set to go live. Now, unclear if this content was paid for or not, or it was sort of throwing certain media outlets a bone. If you play nice with us, we'll shower you in views for the early access content. So easy content to make and good views.
So I think we need to be clear here what the difference is between a review and a preview, because you might be wondering, what is the difference? If they've got early access, surely they can just make anything that they want to make in that preview period. But really the difference is with the reviews, the day one reviews that we would cover, Gamers Nexus, all the independent outlets, there's no restrictions on what we can talk about with the products at all. So we can basically say anything we want to say. We don't sign anything that says that we have to cover certain things. We're just giving our honest opinions on the product, and we're adhering to the NDA so that everyone gets a fair go at making their content at the same time. So there's no rush to get content out and that sort of thing. With previews though, usually there is a document that you sign and agree to get that early access ahead of the review date. So when it comes to a preview, there might be a number of dot points saying, well, you have to test at this resolution, or you have to test these games, or you have to test these configurations. And Nvidia will be very specific about providing certain configurations that are favorable to the product that is being tested, which is why in the case of that 5070 content, there was a lot of focus on configurations that wouldn't exceed the VRAM buffer, were very favorable with frame generation and that sort of thing, which may not have been the focus of the independent reviews that you would have seen a couple of days later.
They almost always don't include Radeon GPUs, so completely ignores the competition, which that's one of the main criteria of paid content, is no competing products. So we just want to show people who have invested in our products before a clear path to upgrade, so why you should be incentivized to upgrade to this new product we're releasing. In the example of the RTX 5070, the friendly media outlets that we're aware of that made some coverage was Gamers Radar and PC Gamer. Both of those were chosen. Gamers Radar, their title for their content piece was, I've been using the RTX 5070 to play a bunch of games early, and it might be the console killing GPU I've been waiting for. Kind of a nothing title there, but it would have been the testing that was a bit unusual. A lot of multi-frame generation on versus off on previous generations, showing very skewed results. PC Gamer, their title read, Nvidia RTX 5070 hands-on preview, a sneak peek at my unreleased RTX Blackwell card hitting triple-digit frame rates in Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p and avowed at 4K. And of course, they were again testing with multi-frame generation enabled on the Blackwell GPU, so the GeForce 50 series GPU, the 5070, and then no multi-frame generation on the previous generation that doesn't support it. So big old skewed graphs with data that makes it seem like the GeForce 50 series is a far more significant upgrade than it really is.
At least with those previews, you were able to see independent review coverage within a couple of days. Like these previews were released ahead of time, but within a few days and still ahead of the launch of the 5070, the actual retail launch, you were able to get the full independent picture, which covered a whole bunch of scenarios and wasn't just the Nvidia games that they thought were the most favorable scenario. So as you can sort of see, we've gone from the 3080 launch back in the day where, a couple of examples were used, but were generally somewhat reflective of the products, to then with this current generation, we've got the 5070, a bit more of that sort of preview, misleading numbers, frame generation, to now what we think is clearly the worst example we have seen of this media manipulation, the RTX 5060 and the previews that we woke up to this morning. And again, like the preview coverage was exactly the same really as the 5070 in the structure, the examples that Nvidia wanted people to use. So 1080p gaming, because the 5060 is supposed to be a 1080p card, lots of multi-frame generation examples, and specifically 4x frame gen on versus no frame gen with 3060s and 2060s, for example. We've seen some pretty egregious charts that show highly misleading inflated numbers there. And so there's all of that. There's all of that angle. You're getting a preview a couple of days ahead of launch that has misleading numbers. But this is compounded by the fact that there's no review program for the 5060. There's no independent coverage of this product. At least it's going to be enabled before launch, because we still, as we sit here today, do not have driver access for the 5060. So with 5070, you got reviews. You would have gotten reviews just before launch. With the 5060, we do not have driver access, and the only way to have gotten driver access for the 5060 is to opt in to this review program.
Yeah, that's right. So in summary, the way this story is developed is many weeks ago now, prior to the RTX 5060 Ti reviews, we had a private meeting with Nvidia where essentially they didn't tell us this, but essentially they revealed that they were bearing the 8GB versions. So the 5060 Ti 8GB and the 5060, no real review program for those. Don't worry about those. So we're bearing them without bearing them. So obviously we managed to get a 5060 Ti 8GB. We've now provided content on that. The 5060, they didn't really mention, they just said when that becomes available in May, you guys can get your hands on one and test it, and you're free to make your reviews. And when we pressed them a bit more on that, it seems like there definitely wasn't a review program. It was unclear when we'd be able to get one, but they'll just appear on shelves, and when they do, we can review one. So not great. Then that story evolved into, we're now releasing it during the Computex trade show. So while all the tech media is out trying to cover the biggest tech trade show of the year, this card will appear on shelves and you'll be able to buy it and review it then, except we're in Computex, or in Taiwan, attending Computex. So can't do that. And although we were able to get our hands on cards weeks ago, Nvidia were withholding the driver. So that means we couldn't get access to the required driver ahead of time to produce our review before we came here to Taiwan, so it could go out on the 20th. So as a result, yeah, we're not going to have a review on the 20th, and probably won't have one shortly after, though we're working on a few things there. So anyway, that's the situation. But as Tim said, making it even worse, now we have the previews, but the previews won't be followed by reviews, except for the outlets that got the preview driver. So the more friendly media outlets that were basically agreed to doing these highly questionable previews are now able to provide reviews. So probably not going to be the most critical RTX 5060 reviews you're going to come across, but could be wrong on that one, but I'm sure some of them will be much more friendly than what you'd see from the likes of Gamers Nexus or us, as an example.
Yeah, there's really been no example in the history so far up until this point where Nvidia's made such a concerted effort to bury what we think is a very mainstream product. Like, there's certainly been products, more niche examples like 3050 6GB come to mind more recently, 3080 12GB as well, where they're just released onto the market. There's not been much review access or anything. They're just released. You have to test it at some point later. The 5060 though, that is the 60 series card. It's not we're not talking about a version of the 5060 that's like a specific, maybe worse version, downclocked or down configured version of the card. This is the 5060 that lots of people will be buying. And so to go through with a preview program, which again, it kind of establishes content on the internet that if you search for the 5060, the first things that will be coming up around the time you're buying the cards are going to be the preview content. And then the first trickling out of those reviews, as you were saying, from the outlets that did previews, and then later down the line, content from us, Gamers Nexus, and the usual people.
So some important details for these previews that you guys are seeing. They had to agree to quite strict guidelines in order to receive the driver, and they had to create this preview content. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, send us the driver, we might do something with it, and then you're able to make the review. You really had to agree to these terms and conditions with Nvidia. So that's what's happened here. And there's half a dozen or so media outlets that have agreed to this that we've seen previews from so far. So GameStar, Games Radar, Tom's Guide, JV Tech, and ASCII 2. which I believe is a Japanese publication. So the guidelines state, as far as we can tell, that it can only be compared, so this is the RTX 5060, can only be compared with the RTX 3060 and the 2060 Super. Now I did see one comparison out of one of these that did look at the RTX 4060, so I'm not 100% sure whether they broke the guidelines or what, but in any case, they weren't allowed to compare with the Radeon GPUs or anything like that, and they really did go out of their way to handpick the cards that would probably make the 5060, well, certainly the testing makes the 5060 look better than it was, but they're trying to target people obviously with these older cards and entice them into upgrading.
That's being generous. I think the clear reason is the 3060 and 2060 Super do not support frame generation of any kind. So they're clearly trying to show, well, 4x frame gen, 4x multi-frame gen, that the 5060 supports compared to no frame generation. And if you include the 4060, you have at least single frame generation. So by specifically including 3060 versus 5060, you're getting the largest difference between generations enabled by multi-frame generation FPS output.
Which is what the graphs from these media outlets show. They're showing 3 times more performance out of a 5060 or more than that, which is crazy. So, but again, that's, as Tim pointed out, frame generation, which I was about to get to. So well, I'll go to the games tested first. So the games tested are Avowed, Doom, The Dark Ages, Marvel Rivals, Cyberpunk 2077, and Hogwarts Legacy. I don't think there's anything too crazy. Of course, Cyberpunk's in there, but the games tested, fine, whatever. I mean, they're all perfectly fine games to include, especially when you're only comparing GeForce GPUs with GeForce GPUs. Don't really have too much of a problem with the games list. I mean, probably not wrapped that there's a games list to begin with and you can't just test it however you'd like to. But it's the settings that are the big problem here. So 8GB GPU, and therefore the testing has been limited to 1080p. Ultra settings though, which is an interesting choice, but with DLSS quality upscaling. So you're at 1080p with quality upscaling, and then if there's ray tracing, ray reconstruction, or path tracing, that's to be turned on when available. And then of course, multi-frame generation. So you could end up with a scenario where the 5060 is only capable of about 20 frames per second, maybe 30 frames per second. But because using multi-frame generation, the performance looks very good and the other GPUs will be pretty well unusable. So again, as Tim said, I said it incentivizes you to upgrade, but it just shows extremely skewed data that is in no way realistic or representative of real world performance. It's really just to break benchmark graphs. So that's the goal there. And really they're trying to work out how to get their own marketing slides into mainstream media. So there's been a big push. We've been targeted with it in the past to test with DLSS, stuff like frame generation enabled.
And it's an attempt to legitimize the misleading marketing. They're going and using the reputation that these sites have in terms of producing independent testing and saying, well, we want you to essentially copy the marketing and put it into a different format that makes it look like you've come to that as an independent conclusion, which isn't necessarily the case because again, there are guidelines that would be listing these testing configurations.
In summary there, or our opinion on this is the previews are very bad, should not be done under any circumstances. There's really no justification for any of these media outlets doing these previews. You should never create content following any company's guidelines, especially when there's strict guidelines like that. So it's damaging, shouldn't be done, very poor practice, and there's really no defending it. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. You agree with that?
Yeah,
it's bad.
You're becoming the marketing arm of the company. It's even if it's not a paid for piece, it's effectively SponCon, like sponsored content.
Well, they're getting paid in one way or another. So why would you take such a deal? Well, you get views. You get easy views. Views is money. So if you're a struggling site or need to pay the bills, taking that kind of deal might seem like a good idea. It definitely isn't. You should definitely not do it. But that's how it boils down to money, is views. That's the currency there. Also, not paying off Nvidia, probably something that a lot of these media outlets don't want to do because it risks views. So they don't get review samples, they can't cover the products, they don't get included in early access. So for example, Nvidia never approached us about doing an early preview on the RTX 5060 because they will know our answer on that one, so they didn't even bother approaching us. But there are other media outlets that, are friendlier and will do that sort of stuff. But they should definitely not do it.
Well, yeah, it's also, sites of our size, Hardware Unboxed, Gamers Nexus, Linus, there's many different ways that we can get review GPUs and cards, and we have many contacts in the industry and we're well established. So it's much harder to prevent us from doing a review. Whereas one of the things we've been really concerned about with this in the past has been the impact it has on smaller channels where they're more reliant on Nvidia directly providing the GPUs and hardware that they test. And
it's not just to be included in the day one reviews, it's actually to get the product. So we can afford to buy RTX 5090s if we need to, or whatever. Again, Gamers Nexus, same sort of position. But if you're just starting out, you don't have those kind of budgets. You can't just go buy an RTX 5090 and then an RTX 5080 and then a 5070 Ti. You're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in most currencies just to review a product line. But we can do that, which is sort of the...
Nvidia knows this, and they use this information to push out previews to these specific outlets and things, knowing that they might have a better chance of running the marketing angles on those channels as opposed to a larger channel where we've got more options. And that's just really tacky. So it's very disappointing to see. Like, I don't like smaller channels being put into that position. Like,
well, we were a smaller channel put in that position.
Yeah, it's a poor position to be put into where you're sort of tossing up, do I do this potentially dodgy content or do I lose out on my revenue stream, my livelihood, because I don't have the cards that I need to do my job? It's not good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, early on in the creation of our channel, we decided we weren't going to work directly in terms of sponsorships, so receive money from AMD, Intel, or Nvidia. The core of our content was going to be focused around those three companies, so we just thought, don't deal with them at all directly, so they have nothing over us and they can't manipulate us in any way. That was a decision we made very early on, and of course we've stuck to that. And the channel was much smaller back in, it was 2019. So the initial RTX release, we covered DLSS. Tim found it wasn't very good, said so. The initial ray tracing promise, not very good, didn't live up to it, we said so. We weren't just repeating Nvidia's marketing saying, you want your games to be ray traced, you want this, you want that, these cards are amazing. We were like, well, the value is not really here at this point in time. Nvidia made it clear to us they were very unhappy with that opinion and that content, and they wanted to change our opinion on that. Something we haven't talked about in the main channel for various reasons. October 2019, I had a private meeting with a few Nvidia representatives in Australia. They flew out from the US. And again, they made it known they weren't happy with our content, what we were doing. We weren't including enough DLSS benchmarks. We weren't including enough ray tracing benchmarks, which, I disagreed with because I thought we were showing the technologies really as they were for gamers. Anyway, long story short, over an hour of trying to beat me down on these points and being unsuccessful, they essentially turned around and said, how much can we pay you? So they wanted us to make a DLSS content piece and include DLSS and reviews. They essentially said, we can sponsor you. We can help you guys out. We can throw money your way and do that. And I just flat out refused and said, no, we don't take money from Nvidia, AMD, Intel. They weren't happy with that. They seemed a bit shocked that we were not, we would turn down money. They probably weren't expecting that. And that was the end of the conversation. And I think from that point, they didn't really see a way forward with us. Mm-hmm. So it was about a year later that we were reviewing the GeForce 30 series. RTX 3060 Ti reviews were coming up and we'd heard nothing. No partners were really talking with us. Any partners that were talking with us said, you need to talk to Nvidia. Shortly after, we got the email, which a lot of you will be familiar with, the change your editorial direction email that created a huge controversy and quite baffling that that situation ever occurred. But basically, they couldn't pay us to do what they wanted us to do, so they attempted to remove us from the GeForce review program. So we're familiar with these tactics and we're aware this has been going on for a long time. The reason why I didn't film a video straight after our private meeting was because it was a private meeting. The people I had the meeting with are no longer at Nvidia, most of them. The person that offered me the money is no longer with Nvidia, they've moved on. But it was a private meeting. There was no evidence that this really took place, and therefore it wasn't really worth making a content piece. I think we discussed it on our private Patreon live stream and stuff like that. We're a bit more transparent there. Then we've seen, how the tactics change, and they are definitely doing these sort of tactics actively right now to other media. They're trying to strong arm them into these multi-frame generation graphs and stuff like that. We're aware that's going on. They haven't done that with us. They generally just provide us with the samples at this point in time and leave us alone, so which we appreciate. That's great. But what we don't appreciate is managing to source products like an RTX 5060 weeks in advance. We have plenty of time to provide you guys with an independent review showing you how the card performs, its strengths and weaknesses, and them actively barring us from doing so. And then, to add insult to injury, they're doing these really dodgy previews, and then the people who do the really dodgy previews are then rewarded with the only people that are allowed to provide a review. So that's a very bad situation.
Yeah, that's right. And so ultimately, I think our conclusion is very, very simple on this one. Don't buy the RTX 5060 at this point. Don't buy it until there are proper independent reviews produced from this card. And this is going to be a much more difficult situation than previous times there's been previews and this sort of manipulation because of all the things we've talked about previously, the lack of everyone being here in Taipei, basically trying to cover other things, being unable to test the product. And yeah, we just want a video like this to be available so that people can understand exactly what's going on with the RTX 5060 and sort of not just leave all that content there, like not just leave all the previews, have that be the only thing that's related to the 5060 out there. We just want a bit more transparency on that situation and to be very, very clear that there's absolutely no way that you should be buying this product based on preview coverage and the marketing materials that you would have seen so far from Nvidia specifically. And again, I'm going to say hopefully Nvidia, by exposing this, won't do it again. But earlier in the video, we showed a pretty clear timeline where Nvidia over time has been getting more aggressive with preview type coverage and trying to manipulate reviewers and the independent media into doing what Nvidia wants. So
I think the most concerning part as well is every example we can point to, it's gotten worse.
And a lot of these things have been talked about at the time. Like there were responses to that 8K videos that were made pointing out how ludicrous they were. There were responses to things like, the 4080 12 gigabyte being highly misleading. There were responses to, there were just independent reviews for the 5070 like a couple of weeks later. And then obviously lots of reviewers have been talking about the multi-frame generation stuff and all those sorts of things in an accurate way. So the fact that all of that's happened, we keep bringing up like, NVIDIA's trying to bury 8 gigabyte GPUs even though they're still making them. And then the next tactic after that is 5060, bury that, then do, these previews. What are we going to be facing next generation? Like if Nvidia is not confident that reviews are going to be positive, which I think that's a really key part of these discussions, is Nvidia doesn't seem very confident in these products. They don't seem to believe that they're good, so they're needing to do more manipulation. If they release another series that is bad, then what tactics are we going to see? Are we going to see even more burying of GPUs? Is that going to be for the higher end products as well? Are they going to focus more on delivering content to media platforms that are favorable to Nvidia and leaving out people who are more independent in their thoughts? It's not a good situation to be in. But again, like we sort of said, we can highlight this issue and then it's probably just going to get worse next time. So
I think the issue is becoming increasingly time sensitive. I really think that gamers need to let Nvidia know they're not happy about this more so than they have been, because they're really refining this process. And it's possibly not too far off a future where Gamers Nexus, Hardware Unboxed are reviews. Either we don't have them or they're heavily buried, because it's not difficult for Nvidia to promote these previews. It's really not difficult for them to boost these previews up when you search for content to make them bury everything else.
And if they see good results from doing that, then they are disincentivized over time from providing the review, drivers or hardware to people that, again, are not following the Nvidia script. If they're seeing that people are believing reviews from those sort of sources and thinking, I don't need to watch a review from someone else because I've already got all the information from a preview, then they're going to be like, well, we've already done the reviews. They're done, all good. So no need to go any further than that. And again, like we're not sitting here, I don't want to sit here and whine and complain like, oh, we're not going to get reviews, not be able to do not going to get review samples or whatever. But I think it goes to the, an independent media is necessary to critically evaluate products. It's essential in markets like this so that at the end of the day, consumers are getting the best advice. They're not wasting money on products that are unnecessary. And yeah, the media is just essential for that process, and any attempts to, I don't know, manipulate that, go around things is, just not what we want to see.
We've also started using Tri-X coolers, and I've got to say the Panorama SE 360 Black is one of the best looking AIOs I've ever seen. The quality of the rotatable display is incredible, and as complex as the design appears, it's remarkably quick and easy to install. So for more information, please check the links in the video description. Finally, a big thank you to G.Skill and Tri-X for helping to make our Computex trip possible this year. G.Skill offers an amazing range of DDR5 memory with AMD Expo support, allowing you to get the most out of your Ryzen processor, and we've been using their Trident Z5 Neo memory in our test systems for years now, as we rely on it to get the best results.
We're not concerned for ourselves at all in this. Like, we'll be fine. We'll continue making content. It's really about you guys getting accurate information. Not even necessarily just you guys. It's people who will be, future gamers. So don't think about right here and now, 5 years from now, people who are coming into PC gaming that don't know about all the, Gamers Nexus, Harbor Unboxed, and whoever else. So they're looking for sources of information. And if they're finding these propped up sources by Nvidia that are essentially propaganda, that's not good. So, and that, I can see a future where that's very easily going to happen. So we'll probably just stop there because we could continue talking about the subject for quite a while. I'm sure we'll have more to say about it in other Computex coverage that'll be coming up later in the week. So we'll leave it there. We really just wanted to address this soon after those previews went out. Again, probably not something that's going to suck in a lot of you guys, but it's still a tactic that we want to see stopped from Nvidia. And again, it's looking like they're wanting to head in the other direction with it. So anyway, that's really all we've got to say right now, or that we should say right now, because we don't want to drag this video out too much, more than what we have. So yeah, we'll see what happens with these RTX 5060 reviews, and we'll see how quickly we can get ours out. As I said, we've got a few things that we're trying to make happen, but quite difficult being over here in Taiwan. But anyway, thanks for watching. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you again next time.